Hey everybody, it's Mike Sullivan with Born to Shine. Today we have an amazing guest. Her name is Shelly Viramontez, and she is the superintendent over at Campbell Union School District in beautiful Campbell, California. Shelly, thank you so much for making time with us while you're recovering from a pretty heavy duty shoulder surgery. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I joke about the fact that maybe this was a reminder to stop shouldering so much responsibility.
Yeah, well,
Carry
it's
you.
we all need a break and a rest and amen for you being here. So thank you for carving out time.
And thank you, Mike, for inviting me.
Well, what was your journey like to become the superintendent, Shelley? That's a really big position. A lot of people looking up to you for your leadership, your wisdom, your guidance. And what was your journey like?
Well, it wasn't intentional. I've actually been invited to speak to different leadership groups about the journey to superintendency. And I say I'm not the one to listen to because I didn't have aspirations to be a superintendent. I actually went to school for public relations and marketing and was doing that part time. And when my oldest was starting school, I mentioned to my husband, I always wanted to be a teacher, but I didn't really, they weren't hiring at the time.
Mm,
And he's like, "Oh, I think you would be great. You should try it." And I said, "I'm not going to go get another degree. What if I'm not good at it?"
mm,
And so I decided, well, I'll be a substitute teacher. And the interesting thing was I went to school in Campbell School District. So I was subbing for San Jose, a local district, and they were going to offer me a job. And so I went to Campbell and I said, "Gosh, I've also done some subbing for you. San Jose is going to offer me a position, but I'd rather work for you." And they were very adamant that we only hire fully credentialed people, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay. So then I was asked to cover a special day class of students who they were thinking about disbanding the program.
mm,
And I took over this class of 14 kids, the classic special day class, 12 boys, 2 girls, in middle school. A couple of my young men had ankle bracelets, to
mm,
tell you a
mm,
little bit about
mhm,
that. And I fell in love with it. And I quickly realized that these kids had a ton of potential that wasn't being tapped into. But the interesting thing was, so about 4 days into me taking this job, the director of special ed from Campbell calls me to offer me a full-time position. So I'm telling her, "Oh, thank you so much, but you can't because I already spoke with HR and they said you wouldn't hire me." And she proceeded to say, "Well, there's sometimes special circumstances." So I said, "Well, how about we give each other 30 days? And if I'm still working out in 30 days and this is still working out for me and my family in 30 days, then we'll make a deal." So that's how I got started in Campbell School District. And then while I was a special education, so I actually had 0 credentials. So I was teaching full time, had small children. My husband worked in the fire service, and I got my general ed credential and my special ed credential. And and then I was noticing that my students and their families didn't really seem to understand why they had a special class.
mm,
And I very much had this, and I still have this belief system of coming from a strengths-based approach.
mhm,
And so I did my master's around a strengths-based approach to teaching and learning. And I discovered this neurodevelopmental model where I would share with students their areas of strength. And then I would work with them so they could actually be their own advocates.
mm,
And even my students who were in 8th grade, we would workshop conversations they could have with their freshman teachers when they transition to high school, because I'm just a K-8 district. And the success of this particular approach was such that then they made me a teacher on special assignment, an intervention specialist, and I started doing the strengths-based approach with a large swath of students, not necessarily students with IEPs, just focusing on the strengths-based approach. Loving that, seeing a difference, um, helping parents understand what skills their students had.
Mhm.
For instance, I remember talking with my students who were diagnosed with ADHD.
Mm.
And I would tell them, if I'm ever in a car accident and I want you standing on the corner because you're taking in so much more information than the average person because you're seeing it all. And we would talk about that strengths and weaknesses are situationally determined. The thing that makes you so strong in this setting can actually be your device in another setting. So how do we gear you towards to you being in more settings that play up on your strengths than trying to minimize your areas of struggle?
Love it. Love it. And when you were K through 12 yourself, Shelly, was there anything that you struggled with? Like for me, I was bullied, I had anxiety, depression, I really struggled. Was there anything that you kind of went through?
Well, in some regards, I feel very blessed. And I think when I was a child, I didn't know how blessed I was because you just know the environment that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a very loving home. My father worked nights and was very involved in my sports and things like that. And so I felt very confident in that regard. One of the things I recognize now, I had some pretty significant body image issues, as particularly in middle school, and the desire constantly always the desire to be thinner and prettier and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the other things I recognize now, as an adult, my mother struggled with depression and anxiety. I didn't know it at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember even as an adolescent, often she would sort of use me as a quasi counselor.
Mm-hmm.
My dad wasn't home in the evenings because he worked nights. And even at the time, I thought it was interesting some of the questions and conversations I'm having as a 12-year-old with my mother, because there were times when it almost felt like role reversal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think some of that experience prepared me for being able to just meet people where they are and understand their journey. And again, that may be where I started from the strengths-based approach, because I remember trying to build her up. Mom, I know that's frustrating for you, but what about this? And what about this? And kind of trying to inspire her that she had more autonomy over herself than she was acknowledging.
I love that. It's amazing how God puts everything together, and I love how you were seeing the strengths in your mom, right? Even though it felt like a role reversal, you were seeing all the beauty and all the talents and all the gifts that she had, and were focused on that and encouraging her in a loving way to kind of redirect her focus. And same with the kids, right? The high risk kids you had, it was, instead of focusing on what are you bad at, is what are you good at? Well, let's dive into that, and let's
Well,
put you
and
on, right?
yeah, and again, having the belief system
Mm-hmm.
that we are beautifully and wonderfully made, right? And
Yeah.
I still believe that our role as educators, every child who shows up is a gift.
Mm-hmm.
Our responsibility is to unwrap and discover the qualities of that gift.
Amen. Absolutely. And this just flows kind of beautifully into the next question, Shelley, which is, what do you notice is working well within your district for support, mental health support for your kiddos?
Well, we have been fortunate, and California's putting together some pretty solid supports for having community schools. So I have a middle school where I have a wellness center on campus, and the kids were part of designing that wellness center and what it needed to have. And it's in a partnership with our county office and our county behavioral and mental health department. And it's been really great to see the kids really work to destigmatize the
Mm.
fact that maybe you have needs. And I was speaking to one of the students a couple months ago about this, and I said, "So how does this get used from your perspective?" And he said, "Well, I'll give you an example. Last week, one of my buddies was just he goes, I don't know what happened to him over the weekend, but he was just sort of off the chain." And he said, I told him, dude, you need to go to the wellness center and just decompress for a little bit and get
Mhm.
yourself back into a space.
Mhm.
And I thought that, how empowering that a 13-year-old can tell their friend, this is what you need. And more importantly, like, this is okay that you need that. That's what you need today. Maybe I'll need it tomorrow.
Yeah, removing the shame, destigmatizing is key, and prevention. So that's wonderful that that's happening. That's a huge step.
Well,
And
and
then,
one of the other things that I've really, really pushed on with my counselors, because as we all know, there will never be enough counselors to meet the needs that our students are coming with. And so doing a peer counselor program where the counselors are supporting the students in developing some of the strategies of conflict resolution and perspective taking and things of that nature, because I feel like that is a skill that our students can carry with them throughout their lives. Just understanding we've become so polarizing, and if we could just leave space and grace for understanding there's probably a different perspective than the one I have, and opening ourselves up to hearing that perspective, it might not change our mind, but at least we understand where the other might be coming from. I've really become concerned about how rapidly we go to conflict, whether it's verbal or actually physical.
right, absolutely. Yeah, that those are lifelong skills they can use in their friendships, in their employment, in their marriage, as a parent, seeing it with their kids. So that's wonderful. And if in a perfect world, if you were to dream up something, what would that something look like for the following school year for additional mental health support? If it's teaming up with outside sources or bringing in people.
Yeah, and we're really blessed. We have some grants from a local hospital, El Camino Hospital, where they give us additional nurses. We have agreements with some of the local universities where we place counselor interns and social worker interns. And then at all of our campuses, we have community liaisons. One of the areas of need that I saw this year was a large influx of newcomers from out of the country,
Mm,
and many of them were coming with no other support system.
mm,
And so, having through our community liaisons, having conversations with these families and trying to build community
mm,
for them. And so,
mhm,
bringing groups of newcomer families together with other newcomer families. And we partnered with a local business where it was ESL. So the
mm,
parents were learning English, the students were learning English, and then we were also able to be really intentional in helping the families understand this is how to navigate our school system. This is what we will do to support you and your child, and this is what you can do to support you and your child. Um, Again, I want to come at that from a strengths-based approach. Yes, maybe their needs are greater, but they also bring a lot to our community. Um, and I sometimes joke that if all you've ever had is Wonder Bread, you're probably content with it. But once you have 12 grain, you really can't go back to Wonder Bread. So one of the things I love about my schools, I have 12 schools, very socioeconomically diverse. I have one school in probably one of the most affluent areas in our county. And then I have another school that's 88% free and reduced lunch,
mm,
80% second language.
mm.
And again, each of those schools has strengths and things that they bring to our community. And part of this is selfish because these kids are going to be the ones that are taking care of me in my old age. They're going to be the ones that are discovering how to cure cancer and
Mhm.
Alzheimer's and all of that. So making sure that we're investing in all of them really is good for us who are older.
Love it. That's so beautiful. And the foresight and the wisdom, that's just, yeah, beautiful, Shelley. And if there are any final thoughts, or if you were thinking, why didn't Michael ask me this? I really wanted to share this. What would that be? What's on your heart?
It's not a why didn't you ask me this? It's more of a realization, and I saw it really be prevalent during COVID, and I see it still lingering. And I mentioned it before, the polarization. I have had a few situations where I'm in the position where I sometimes have to make hard decisions.
Mm,
Um, and often I have information that I can't share because of legal limitations or whatever. But I find people being so adamant and so convinced that they know what the right decision is,
mm,
even though they don't have all of the information. And I don't
mm,
just see this in my little setting. I see this on the evening news every night.
mm,
And one of the things for 11 years, I was the lead negotiator for our district. And I was proud of the fact that I had good labor relations. We didn't always agree, but we could always have conversation. And what I would say to my labor presidents, I would say, you know what? Our perspective will always be influenced by where we stand in the yard and look. The best we can do is I can share with you, this is what I see from where I stand in the yard. You can share with me, this is what I see from what my position in the yard. And at a minimum, we each have a broader perspective than the one we came in with. And I feel like if we could do that on a larger scale,
mm,
and I also, one of my tenets is the four agreements.
mm,
And I really do try to uphold those agreements. And one of the most important ones I find is to not to assume best intention of the other.
mhm,
And so if it doesn't make sense to me what this other person is doing, my assumption is I must not have all the information.
mm,
And to really try to hold space for that and hold a spirit and a mindset of curiosity. Like, instead of getting upset because you have a differing view than mine, being curious to understand, where does your view come from and what might I need to listen to? One of the things I tell our administrators is feedback is a gift.
mm.
We don't always like the wrapping that the gift comes in,
Right.
but we do need to be mindful of unwrapping it to see what gift might actually be in that feedback.
Absolutely. No, no, please. I love that. It's so true. And being making the shift for all of us, myself included, from being self-centered to others-centered, that will make it a lot easier too, to openly welcome feedback and thinking, well, we have the end goal of students winning and doing well and succeeding, and from whatever point of view we have in the yard, in the backyard, or the front yard, let's share those perspectives and see if maybe something even more helpful can be brought from that. So I love it. I love how you're focusing on strengths, how you're helping your students make a shift to what perspective they're seeing things, and the other's perspective being others centered, and just empowering the parents as well, that we're all in this together, because the kiddos, they are our future. So it's
Yeah. Well, and I do have, and I have had for a number of years, a student advisory council, and it's
mm,
two students at whatever the highest grade is for
mhm,
that particular school. And I use them as my problem solving group. And I'll bring survey data back to them. We do annual surveys, and one of the things I've really been working on them with is I'll say, well, so what are your ideas to improve this, to move us to, a five, get more fives on this particular thing. And what I noticed is, initially when I was working with them, the solutions were very external.
mm,
We need more supervision. We need more this. We need more that. One example was, the survey data showed that the students didn't feel like their schools were clean, even though it got a very high rating from the parents. And when I drilled down with students, it was actually the bathrooms that weren't
Mm,
clean.
mm,
So I said to the students, I said, well, we don't use your restrooms, right? So where is the problem coming from?
right.
And so really that's another thing too. I feel like we've been so supportive of our students, which is not a bad thing, but I worry that we're not empowering them to come up with the solutions and to be part of the solution. Because that's another one of my tenets. I don't believe in doing things to people. I believe in doing things with people.
Mm,
And so how can our students take ownership of their own learning, set their own goals? If they don't like what they see in front of them, yes, protesting is one option, but so is trying to make an impact and doing like, what can you do from where you stand? So that's what I've been really working with my students on it, because I also feel like that says to them, they're not a victim to what is happening.
mhm.
They can take it captive and have a positive impact rather than sit by, wring their hands, and complain about the state of things.
Love it. Shelly Viramontez, thank you so much for your time today, sharing your experience, your wisdom, and thanks for carving out time for us today.
And I appreciated the opportunity, Mike.